Welcome back to our typing class. Today we're typing Dr. K from the Healthy Gamer YouTube channel. We'll talk about how the double deciders are just amazing at laughing about themselves because they're simply not that attached to their ego. You'll also see how the elite intuitives are afraid of nothing more than paperwork, and how to pick apart feminine OE from feminine OI. Holly and I have been practicing objective typing for the past few years, and a few months ago we started typing additional celebrities on our own. And we wanted to share what we learn with others so they can learn alongside of us. But the people that we're typing here are officially confirmed by Shan and Dave.
So if you don't know, Dr. K is a psychiatrist and the co-founder of a mental health coaching company, I guess, called The Healthy Gamer. He also provides YouTube videos on mental health and meditation. Biases going in. So I wasn't actually aware of Dr. K. I had not come across him before we decided to type him. I just knew that people in the community were interested in him. So I actually didn't have any biases before I started watching him. But after watching him, I did quickly find that I was reminded by someone in the community, some ENTP that people definitely know of. So that was my initial bias. What was yours?
My biases were overall quite similar. I had watched a couple of videos here and there. A lot of the stuff I liked, but in some videos he came across as quite full of himself, which I found a little bit annoying. But yeah, I thought he might be a sleep last ENTP, but I thought, could also be similar to Sadhguru, so some extroverted INFJ jumper. That was a possibility that I seriously considered going in, and I wanted to be especially careful about the difference between OI and OE. But yeah, ENTP may be something similar.
So the first part we're going to look at is whether he is an observer or a decider. This is probably the most important coin that you can look at to start with. So let's have a look at this clip and see, is he actually an observer or is he a decider?
Because those things are things that we hold on to. We have all these negative experiences. Each date that I go on, each time I send out a job application in this massive pool, each time that someone gets back to me after I've applied to a job and they're like, hey, can you upload your resume into our specific portal and retype everything? And it's like, that's why I sent a resume, right? Each of these tiny little traumatic experiences we have, and then what do we do as soon as I'm done uploading my resume into the 16th, corporate portal because they want it formatted in their way? What do I do after 16 of those? I'm so exhausted that I'm going to go play a video game. I sure as hell ain't going to stop and think about it, right? I'm not going to be idle. I need to get the hell away from this.
To give you some context on this short clip, the video is overall about processing emotion, how our modern environment is really not set up for us to process our emotions properly. And in this moment, he just gives a random example that he came up with something that happens to you that really hurts you emotionally, that he says traumatizes you. And what is his problem? What traumatizes him? Dealing with forms. It's not about people. It's like dealing with things and information, getting the information quite right, repeating something that you already did, like uploading your resume again. And this ties into one of the funny anecdotes, especially about people with SI last. The anecdote goes that they're afraid of paperwork compared to people with NI last who are afraid of ghosts. So maybe not a decider if that's your random example for something traumatic that happens to you. Maybe possibly someone with Demon SI as far as the anecdote goes.
Now, I know for me as someone with Demon SI, I can also relate to the frustrations about paperwork and what he's talking about, having to upload your resume to yet another server. It's just annoying to go over the same information again and again and to get it right. But it's also not something that I get stuck on as a double observer. So this actually leads into the next clip that we want to look at, who Dr. K is doing an interview with Dr. Mike, who we know is a double observer. So let's have a look and see if we are seeing double observing or double deciding from Dr. K.
So when you talk about the Buddha, when you did this thing over here, right? So when you talk about that, it sounds to me like that's really the one thing that you sort of haven't grasped fully yet. You're aware that it's possible. You know that people kind of do it. I'm not saying that you haven't grown and you haven't learned how to carve out balance in your life, but it feels like Mike, everything you do is so damn effortful. You work so hard at it.
It's funny. You're saying the exact opposite of what the attendings who have trained me say. They say Mike always takes the path of least resistance. He works smarter, not harder. It's like the exact opposite of the feedback I've been giving my whole life. So it's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, so that means on the one hand, maybe I'm completely wrong. All right, because if it's completely contrary,
there's truth to both sides as always.
And no, well, maybe I'm just wrong, right? I just could be talking about
because you're not wrong. You're not wrong in the sense of like, but I sometimes feel that on an unfair characterization of my work. When, like, I remember my ex-girlfriend's father said something like, "Oh, Mike's really smart. Like, he figured out a way to not work so many hours in the hospital."
Great.
Where I'm like, are you insane? Like, do you know how many hours I work on social media and how stressful this is and all this thing?
Yeah.
So like, sometimes I do feel like it's an unfair characterization, but at other times I agree with it.
I mean, so here's like, even when it comes to happiness, like you talk about being introspective, you've worked at happiness.
Mm-hmm. Well, right? It's not like work sounds tedious.
So in this clip, what we see is Dr. K is giving an observation about Dr. Mike, and Dr. Mike responds, well, it's funny you should say that because everybody else seems to see the opposite. So of course, Dr. K goes, oh, well, in that case, I could be completely wrong. So what we're seeing here is a right or wrong when it comes to observations. So it's all in one way, all in the other when it comes to observations. Whereas Dr. Mike kind of later on goes, I can see both sides when it comes to people's observations about me.
Okay, so far we've seen maybe possibly a single observer, maybe possibly not a double observer, but can we also see, to do all the cross checks, double deciding. So in the next clip, it's a little bit confusing, but what's happening here is someone created a clip of Dr. K talking to himself. So they took like two different clips and edited it together so it sounds like or looks like he's talking to himself. And then you have a third Dr. K who's reacting to that live. And the whole thing is hilarious. Just watch.
Okay, Dr. K gets into a heated argument. I'm going to toss out a word. Do you feel inadequate? Sure, of course. Everyone does. Yes, everyone. But I think for you, like, let's admit it, and I think your mind deviates away from this, right? It's not going to be logic that pokes a hole in this. Usually my experience with people who are super into logic is that if their logic is incorrect, they get really, really angry, and then they just can't see that their logic is wrong. It doesn't change. The two are completely unrelated. Like how the fuck? Just look at that. It's absurd. Think about it. Even now, the way that when you get mad at yourself, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Sounds like you were just a loser. Huh? So, a loser and a failure. What do you mean by those words? There's something inherently wrong with you. Okay. Oh, I mean, you are not worth very much. Let me think about how to... No, don't speak. That's stupid. When you speak, bad things happen. Oh my God. Why is that bad? People are going to get frustrated if you do that.
I can't believe I said this.
Don't speak because you're dumb. What's wrong with that? Because that's dumb. You're dumb. Sit down and shut up. I'm going to have to sit with that for a second. Sit with it now. And also I'm going to grab a tissue. Is that okay? Sit. Let me think about my comeback. This actually looks like this is frighteningly like a real conversation. Did you want to say something else? It's all good, man. Okay. See, that was good. You sat with it. It's good.
So how does the third Dr. K in the corner react to this video of him arguing about himself? Is he embarrassed? Does he get weird about it? About like how the tribe maybe possibly sees him? No, not at all. Like he admits that he says some weird things, but he laughs about himself. Like he doesn't get weird, he doesn't get uncomfortable, he is very much entertained and he takes it lightly because he's just not that attached to his own identity, which is the great strength of the double deciders.
Okay, so now we've seen enough proof that Dr. K is in fact a single observer. So let's go after the deciders now. So the clip that we're going to see is another interview with him and Dr. Mike, who is FESI. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for the censoring. FESI. So now we're going to do a decider comparison with Dr. Mike.
So Parasite, your brain, functional MRI, is going off and experiencing all these negative things. The movie ends, you realize you didn't go through this horrible situation and you feel better. I would also relate this to addiction with gambling. You lose all of your money. You've mortgaged your house. You've lost all this stuff. After you lose, you realize you're still alive and life goes on, you get an endorphin rush. And that is why frequently people are addicted to gambling and they're actually addicted to losing, because there's such a rush in losing and yet still surviving. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I'm going to have to think about that. Let me see if you've tumbled down the entire foundation of how I understand this stuff. Give me a second. I don't think so. So here's what I'll say, okay? So I think what you've done a beautiful job of doing is illustrating the mechanism of like rebound relief. So there's an interesting experiment. I can't think of the reference right off the top of my head, but I know I've got it sitting on my Google Drive. So they took like, 100 people and they had them put their hand in cold water. And like the water was of different temperatures. So like it was like painfully cold and then like even more painfully cold. But the experiment that they looked at was that, if you have the most painful experience, like painfully cold water, and they start to warm it up at the end. And even though they never get to the warm, they never reach like the less cold water, people will rate that second experience as more favorable than absolutely being in warmer water. So I think there's absolutely a principle that you're tapping into, which is like a neuroscience mechanism through which the relief of a negative experience can be like reinforcing in some way. With you, I think that's very good point from a neuroscience perspective. I still think, though, that is a mechanistic neuroscientific thing that doesn't quite translate. If anything, maybe I gave the wrong example, but I think what I'm kind of talking about is actually like a state of consciousness or a state of mind. It's a perspective that I think we can all experience, that essentially when we look at like the karmic religions, they talk about something called enlightenment.
Okay, can I just point out how funny it is with Dr. Mike looking so drained by this conversation? So just for context, this clip is part of like a 2.5 hour interview with Dr. Mike, and sort of Dr. Mike gets progressively more and more drained looking.
Although technically he's the one who's more extroverted.
Yeah, which is funny.
Yeah.
So the reason for that, we'll get to the savior thinker here, is that Dr. K, oh my god, I'm going to get confused with Dr. K and Dr. Mike. Dr. K is quite happy to disagree in a savior state. So Dr. Mike at the end goes, disagree with me if you can. Like it's kind of like I'm sick of you disagreeing with me.
Yes.
Punch. And Dr. K is quite calmly able to say, just let me think about that. And he does. He actually stops to think about it, which is not something that TE does, for comparison. So TE would kind of figure it out while they're talking, regardless of whether you're save your play or save your sleep.
And figure out with the other.
Yes, figure out with the other. So he has to stop and think about it. And he makes the comment of, need to see whether this tumbles down my current logic or whatever he
my
says.
TI stack, maybe?
Pretty much. And then, after pausing for a bit, he goes, no, I disagree. And here's why. So, maybe it's not anecdotally, but most lead thinkers, at least, are known to be quite disagreeable. So if you are a thinker, try to pay attention to how many times you start a sentence with no but. Because, yeah, you might not think you're disagreeing, but if you're starting a sentence with no, you're quite clearly disagreeing.
Especially masculine thinkers.
Yeah.
We just saw Dr. K disagreeing calmly in a savior state, so he's possibly a savior thinker. The other side of the coin would be demon feeling. So can we see that? We saw in an earlier video that he talks about processing emotions. This is something that seems to be difficult for him, that might be not a given. But let's watch another clip.
And I think that despite all of Reckful's, out of everything that he gave to us, I think at the end of it, unfortunately, he was fighting it alone. And he lost. But just because he lost doesn't mean that you have to. So what happens when a champion falls? He gave us so much. Like, I remember, being like a 20-year-old kid playing WoW and like watching his videos, and I was like, damn, that guy's awesome. Like, I wish I could be like that good at WoW. I was a fan. He was a friend of mine. And what do we do when a champion falls? Do we stop fighting? It's a personal battle and all of us have to fight it. But you have to fight it, but you don't have to fight it alone. You absolutely don't have to fight it alone. And I don't want you to fight it alone, and I'm not going to let you fight it alone. I'm going to fight with you. But I can't do it alone. So I've got a pretty big HP pool. I've got 100 hit points. I lost 80 of them yesterday.
In the video that we just saw, he is live processing the suicide of another gamer that he knew and that he regarded as a friend. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, you see him sad, you see him experiencing negative emotions, but he also seems to be in a demon state, like this is uncomfortable for him, this is maybe not quite natural for him, but he's also talking it out loud. Like he's really trying to relieve the pressure of the negative emotions by letting them out and processing life that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting as someone for me with Demon FI, seeing someone live processing like that in a video stream in front of a whole bunch of people, my mind automatically goes to, you must be faking this in some way, because why would you be processing your emotions like this in front of so many people? Now, obviously, I know that's not true, but it's just as someone with FI, that's how I automatically interpret it without having to then do the mental gymnastics to be like, oh, actually, this is how your feeling functions.
Yeah, that it makes sense for someone with FE, and that it's actually something very positive for them.
Now we've confirmed that Dr. K is a single observer and he is also a thinker. Now in the last clip that we just watched, Dr. K is also comparing his emotional state to hit points and what it's like in a game when you lose your hit points. So there is a bit of talk in there as well. So the next clip that we want to watch is a comparison with Sadhguru. So in the start of this video, Felix mentioned that one of his biases was that Dr. K could potentially be something like Sadhguru. Now that is fair because they are kind of in a similar arena. They talk about similar things. So the clip that we want to watch is a comparison between Sadhguru and Dr. K talking about the same topic, which is karma.
And by the way, Sadhguru's type is audio, NITI, sleep last, play, and consume last. And he's also number 1.
The sensory.
I grew up hearing the word karma, saying that if you do something bad, then bad things are coming for you. And you talk about in the book that it not necessarily that case. Can you define karma for the uneducated person like myself on what karma truly is?
I thought that was my title. You're stealing that from me. Uneducated guru is what people say, and now you're saying you're uneducated
human
interviewer. Anyway, about if you do bad things will come for you. This has been the way of the world. You don't need the word karma for that, because people have been trying to control people, either with fear or guilt. This has been the basis of a whole lot of things happening in the world. If you do this, you will go to hell, if you do that, you will go to heaven, otherwise here itself it will happen to you, whatever. Or there is somebody up there with a stick waiting and they will whack you. All these kind of things. Essentially, you're trying to manage humanity, control humanity with fear or guilt.
Yeah.
Fear and guilt, I see particularly in the Western world, is like enormous. It is in the psyche of people in such a big way. Well, karma is not about fear, karma is not about guilt, karma is about liberation. It is about freedom. Because you're a composite, as you sit here, you're a composite of various memories within you.
Yes.
It goes back, it goes way back, but let's start with amoeba in recent times.
In this interview with Lewis Howes, we see Sadhguru narrowing things down to kind of this or that categories. So humanity is being controlled by fear or guilt. And another thing that he narrows down on is that karma is about liberation or freedom.
Now in comparison, let's take a look at how Dr. K talks about karma.
So I think karma can be really useful because it helps us understand, like, how the world works, basically. So it is my belief that if you want to be better at life, you should understand how life works. That competence and ease at activities comes through understanding of those activities. So if I understand, like, you know, how to control a character in World of Warcraft, like if I use WASD and a mouse, and I understand what the W key does, and what the A key does, and what the S key does, and what the D key does, that my success in a particular game will be improved, right? Sort of a no-brainer. And so the question is that true of other things? Like, is that true of life? Like, if you understand how psychology works, if you understand how, you know, habit works, if you understand how biology works, do you get better at the game of life? Like, if you understand the nature of procrastination and where procrastination comes from, will you do better? And I think the answer is yes. And so karma is one of the biggest things. Like, you know, we can talk about habit and psychology and procrastination, but those are all like one slice of what life offers, right? So like this is going to be psychology and neuroscience and things like that. But life has like other big chunks, right? So we can like do this. And I think that karma is over here. And I think it's actually helps you understand even more than psychology and neurology and stuff like that. Because this kind of explains why things happen. And if we understand like why things happen, it becomes way easier to understand life. So we're going to start this in kind of a weird, what's the other half? That's for you guys to figure out. So we're going to start by sort of, let's start here, okay? So let's say that here's human knowledge. And I want you guys to just think about this for a second, okay? So like, let's say 5,000 years ago, humans understood this much. And then we had this. So let's say like this is a cloud with a thunderbolt, right? And then we also had like biology. Or let's say, let's not call it biology. Let's call it illness. Okay. So like there was some phenomenon and human beings like understood this. So this is ours. And when they looked at like weather, they said like, oh, that's not us. Like, we don't understand how that works. That doesn't have principles to it. This is a guy named Zeus.
To figure out someone's functions, it's less important to listen to what they're actually saying and rather try to answer the question, how are they talking? How are they speaking about these topics? Yeah. And why are they saying the things they're saying? So how Dr. K talks about karma is different from how Sadhguru talks about karma, because Sadhguru makes it a narrowed down discussion, like putting everything into boxes, while Dr. K doesn't. Like, he talks about it in much more explorative ways, and he links karma to all kinds of different things. But you also see like some other things that we already mentioned. So he dives into an analogy about karma and uses a gaming analogy again. Yeah. He emphasizes the importance of knowledge and information. You need to understand. He also emphasizes understanding. But then kind of links it to all these kinds of other things throughout history, like how our understanding evolved about the clouds and Zeus and biology and God. And he also connects it to habits and all these other things. It's much more explorative. It's much more open. It's not as clean cut as how Sadhguru talks about that stuff.
So we have another clip here which shows just a little bit more OE from Dr. K in terms of his life path and his choices and how he kind of got to where he is now. So let's have a look at this clip and see what we can see.
So then I spent 7 years studying to become a monk. And during that time, studied all kinds of different stuff. So didn't really find one particular guru or tradition that I was ready to like devote myself to. So I studied at ashrams in India, a little bit in South Korea and Japan as well, and just really like wandered all over the place.
Wow. So you went from video game addicted to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And that was the thing is I remember being like a freshman in college. And
what was the game you were addicted to, by the way? Or was it a genre?
So I played a ton of Diablo 2 and a ton of Warcraft 3. So like I wanted to be one of the best Warcraft 3 players like in the world when I was a freshman in college, which is a terrible idea.
Okay. Then those games are, they don't end easily. So I can see how getting sucked into them, it doesn't stop.
Yeah. So just wandered around India and started studying like medicine because, like Eastern medicine, because I think that there was just a lot of information there about how human beings work. Decided not to become a monk. Met my wife, fell in love, all that good stuff. and then decided to go to medical school. So I did neuroscience research for a couple of years at Harvard, went to medical school, and then trained to become a psychiatrist, and then was on faculty at HMS for 6 years.
So what we're hearing here is the typical OE story. So he went around all over the world, studied many different traditions with lots of different gurus because he couldn't choose one. Then he eventually went into medicine after deciding that he didn't want to become a monk. And then he did a few different things when it came to medicine. So he couldn't narrow down on just one concept or one idea. He just wanted to gather them all up, try them all out. And he was quite happy just expending energy wandering all over the world.
In particular, this interview with Charlie from Charisma on Command was especially good to really get to know Dr. K and his whole life story and what's really important for him and also what he's been really struggling with. So let's take a look at another clip.
I was growing up, I played a bunch of video games, was sort of addicted to video games, basically failed out of college, and then went to India to find myself. Mm-hmm. So at the age of 21, spent one summer outside of Bangalore at an ashram studying like meditation and yoga, and really just completely fell in love with it. I'd been going through life and like learning things about the external world, like, okay, this is math and this is like history and this is Spanish. But I was always incredibly frustrated because like I could not do the things that I wanted to do. Like I couldn't get my mind to focus. I couldn't wake up on time. I couldn't exercise. Like I had all these goals, but it was like I was just not in control of my body and mind. So what I loved about India is like learning a system that teaches you essentially self-control and understanding how your body and mind works. And I think that so then I spent 7 years studying to become a monk. And during that time, studied all kinds of different stuff.
What did he struggle with growing up? He was addicted to video games. Like he couldn't stop, he couldn't control himself. And when he went to India to experience a completely new way of life and learn now new things that he didn't know about, like he said, like he learned in school about the outside world and math, and now he finally learned about himself and what's important for him for his physical health and his mental health. He was fascinated with the system of control that he get, and this is what he was missing. So the control is what he's after, the control is what he's struggling with, the control is what wasn't the given for him in the first place. So possibly rather demon OI and maybe also demon sleep.
To tie all of this up, what we can see is that he's quite clearly not consume last. He did actually go to college, he did study all the information. And another thing that we see consistently, and you will see if you've watched a number of his videos, but also in the clips that we've shown so far, he really does hammer down on the information. Like that is important to him, which Blast Last would not do. So this clearly leaves sleep last for him. So he is an extrovert, he is savvy consume, and he is infodom.
When it comes to Dr. K's social type, we quickly narrowed down that he might be rather number 2 or number 3, because neither 1 nor 4 didn't really fit at all. But for a long time we weren't sure if he's actually the specialist, the psychiatrist, or if he's something broader. But let's take a look at the clip and see what happens if he's asked to explain what he actually does.
What do you say when you meet somebody at a cocktail party and they say, "What do you do?"
So, my stock answer is actually like, I'm a physician by training, or I say I work in digital mental health. So
Digital mental health. I imagine that everybody knows what that is.
Well, so that's the thing, right? Is it's like enough buzzwords to where it kind of like people don't usually ask questions after that. So I think it kind of depends on, okay, what am I really looking for? Like, do I want to talk about myself right now? Sometimes I'll just say I'm a psychiatrist. That's true.
But you've updated yourself. You are a clinically trained psychiatrist who has brought himself into the 21st century.
I guess you could say that. I think maybe the 21st century has brought me into it is maybe a better way to put it. But yeah, I think we're both kind of evolving together at the frontier.
The biggest difference between the number 2s and number 3s is of course the generalized specialized coin. So how does he answer Chris's question? So one way that he sometimes goes is he just hides behind the specialization that he actually has, but then he also has this line of, oh, I'm in digital mental health. And then you could go, okay, what the fuck does that even mean? Okay, you do something with mental health, what is the digital part? What else do you do? Because yes, he's a psychiatrist, but he also trained in his monk stuff, but then he's also a Twitch streamer and a YouTuber, and he has his own additional business, this coaching business. He offers courses and other streams. So he is really not the typical psychiatrist, even though he has the specialization in his utility belt. And once you listen more to him, it really becomes clear that he is very much driven by wanting to help other people and wanting to have a broader impact and not just being the specialist.
Yeah.
And he really has the friends coin too. In most of his videos, you easily see him being silly. He sits there with a t-shirt or with a hoodie. He doesn't have the typical professionalism that separates the threes from the twos and also that the ones usually have. He is a bit sloppier, a bit more laid back. And typically for the generalist too, he has his own inspiring stories, so to speak, that he often tells about how he was the gaming addict and how he made it out of it by actually fighting his demons.
So Dr. K's full type, now let me see if I can get this right, is audio, NETI, consume, play, blast, sleep, number 2.
Nice.
Got it. So as we've seen, Dr. K is a total OE chaos monkey skiv who was actually able to find inner peace through implementing discipline of his mind and his body. So this made him even more impressive to us, knowing what his saviors are and then what he's actually been able to do for himself.
I said in the beginning of the video that I found him initially a little bit annoying, and while this is still somewhat true, I ended up really liking him after we got to know him a bit better through watching more of his videos, and I was very impressed with him. I also did his meditation course, which is great and I can recommend. The only maybe hole in his game, I would say, is that he projects a lot. So whenever he talks to someone, he just assumes that they're also a skip chaos monkey who has a hard time processing their emotions, which is simply not true because people are very different and have different types. But if you take that into account, I think you can really learn from him a lot.